we doing today? We're here for the event From Risk to Revenue, a proactive approach to securing renewals. Of course, whenever I start things off, I always want to kick it off with a quick icebreaker. So I want to pass this question along to our panelists today. With summer coming to an end, are there like any fall or winter activities that you guys have been looking forward to? Tony, you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Elliot. One of our favorite things in my family to do in the fall is there's plenty of active festivals in the kind of DFW area. So we have some fun festivals we're looking forward to, like the Hot Air Balloon Festival, some Oktoberfest, a Korean festival, and one of our favorite art festivals are coming up. So we're about to spend lots of time outdoors as the weather starts cooling.
Oh, wonderful. You would think that's the opposite. When it gets colder, you stay inside, but you're going outside. I love it.
Well, when we've
Melanie,
had like 45 days of over 100-degree weather, we're
no,
we're
fair,
looking forward to it cooling off.
fair enough, fair enough. Melanie, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I am based out of Ontario, Canada, where we have very cool winters. But like any or most typical Canadians, winter for me means hockey. I have a son who plays competitive. He's a goalie, and this year they've actually asked me to be coach. So we live at the rink from basically October to April, and I love it.
Oh, fantastic. Vanessa and yourself?
Yeah. So I'm San Francisco based. And so our summer, we get our really nice weather starting about now and through September. It's really nice. So going to be outside a lot coming up. And then I think a specific fall activity looking forward to is I have a nephew. He's about a year and a half. So I think pumpkin patch, that'll be an activity that I definitely want to do with him. A little bit more fun than, going on my own without kids. So I think that'll be a fun activity this fall.
Oh, I love that. Going to get some pumpkin carving in too.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I think for me, not good at it by any means, but going to like an ice rink and just kind of skating around, or really just like falling on my ass while sipping on the hot chocolate afterwards. That's my idea of a good time. Okay, it does look like we have some more folks in attendance here, so we're gonna kick things off. Of course, today's event is brought to you by the team here at Modern Sales Pros. For everyone who's not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, and sales operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners that they may not know about. We do that through live sessions like this, an online forum, and our quarterly summits. And if you're not already a part of MSP, you're going to be invited to join after this event. Speaking of live events that we have going on, we actually have our Dreamforce Happy Hour happening September 12th. I'm going to be dropping a link in the chat momentarily. It's going to be super cool. It's happening at Mataray on Minna Street, right before Salesforce Park. Super centralized. Feel free to hop over if you can. Before we go into the content, we got some quick housekeeping notes here. First of all, this event is being recorded. You're going to be able to access the recording and key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. And if there's any questions for our panelists, please do use the Q&A function or the chat, and they're going to do their best to get to them during the event. Okay, Melanie, I'm going to hand things over to you to talk about Catalyst, and now I'm going to drop off. I'll be back at the end of this event.
Amazing. Awesome. Appreciate it. We are super happy to be here. Me personally, super excited to be here. I am representing Catalyst. Catalyst is the #1 platform to help you drive growth through your customers. So companies like HireLogic, Braze, and Fivetran all use Catalyst to increase upsells, retention, and expansions, and really get ahead of risk, which I know is a topic of today's conversation. I personally, as the renewal manager at Catalyst, use Catalyst to kick off the renewal cycle, and you rely on Catalyst to help me manage those renewals all the way through to once the deal is closed. So definitely, if you have any questions specific to Catalyst, reach out and we'd be happy to answer. Moving into introductions of each of us. So again, my name is Mel or Melanie. I am the Senior Renewals Manager at Catalyst. I'm a team of one, so super important for me to be able to automate, scale, but do so really strategically and really thoughtfully. I am based out of Ontario, Canada, as I had already mentioned. Joined Catalyst about 2 years ago as a senior CSM, and just over a year ago had the opportunity to join the commercial side, really put my stamp on things, define what process should look like, how we want to move forward with renewals, forecasting, etc. Previously, I managed both a regional or scaled team as well as a strategic team at a real tech company, and have been in customer success for about 7 years now. Tony, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yes, thank you so much, Mel. So I'm excited to join as the moderator for today's discussion. I'm Tony Tiffany, Vice President of Customer Success at Orem. We are an AI-powered live conversation platform that supercharges sales activity, connects sales teams, and enables salespeople to drive more revenue over the phone. I have the pleasure at Orem of leading all of our customer success related teams, including our post-sales CSM team, our pre-sales solutions and sales engineering team, as well as our customer support and implementation. And Vanessa, let's hand over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Excited to wrap it up here in intros and dive in. Exciting questions coming our way. Vanessa Gatihi, I lead one of our CS teams at Slack. Been at Slack for 5 years in a couple different roles. I first joined years back managing some of our largest, most strategic enterprise customers at Slack. Then I managed one of our scale regions, scale CSM teams out of the West Coast. And now I'm managing a new segment that we're creating at Slack, which is really exciting, called Portfolio Excellence. We're really trying to focus on what does new modern CS look like? How do we apply more of the digital and automated touches to our highest paying, high touch enterprise customers for a seamless customer journey where we're continually driving efficiency for the CSMs. And so that's what I've been doing this past, year and a half, and excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Vanessa. Definitely exciting. And what you're focusing on has been a hot topic and focal point for many businesses out there. So as we kick off, we've heard pretty much on repeat this year about the great app layoff and how businesses are more than ever likely to cancel or not renew their SaaS subscription services. This has certainly presented some pretty significant challenges to SaaS businesses who rely on customer renewals. It's become very abundantly clear that those kind of fat times of 2021 are long gone, and businesses cannot take a backseat approach to retaining their customers. So as this challenge has highlighted, we really recognize more than ever that a renewal campaign is a sales campaign. And many of my peers in CS and other business leaders have certainly taken a new approach and refreshed a viewpoint of the renewal process with a similar structure and rigor that they've run on the sales side. So let's kick off today's discussion with you, Mel, talking about your team's renewal process. What elements perhaps of your historical sales processes have you applied to the renewal process? And what are some key differentiators?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that the way that we are currently running renewals is not necessarily, there's not like a finite window where process begins and ends. And I think that is probably pretty similar to a sales cycle where I'm actually introducing myself right from the onset of having a net new customer to start building that relationship. When we get to that more kind of predetermined window of maybe 128 days or 120 days out from the renewal date, we do have methodology that we are really have used, brought in from the sales team. Earlier this year, we had a new CRO join who's absolutely brilliant and had brought in a sales roadmap. It covers by stage what key questions need to be answered, what gives and gets are available, what key questions we need to answer internally, and activities that have to occur in order for us to progress to the next stage. And prior to this, our renewal and sales processes were if there was overlap, it was coincidental. So what we've done since this new sales roadmap has been introduced is we were able to take this roadmap and really rework it for renewals. So there's total alignment in the way that our sales and CS teams are thinking about progression of stages. We have the same ways of identifying and defining risk as part of these cycles. And so it's been really important for us to have that kind of common vernacular and common cycle that we can refer to as we're collaborating throughout the organization. Some of the differences, I think in a sales cycle, I don't come from sales necessarily, but I would assume that, there's got to be some sort of value promised and return on investment promised. At time of renewal, that has to be realized. There's no more room to make promises. You have to be able to come to the table with quantifiable value that you've provided in order to earn that business once again. And so I think that it would be one of the biggest differences, and one of the ways that we are introducing or talking about kind of that ROI throughout the renewal roadmap. I think that some of the overall sales ideas though of never losing alone is super important and something that we've always practiced as part of renewals too. So retention is a target that we're sharing across the organization, and we really do have support from every corner to help renew customers. So there are tons of similarities as well.
Got it. What are some of the questions you mentioned? There's both internal questions that you need to answer before moving a customer to the next stage, as well as some potential questions you're asking the customer throughout the process. Mel, can you give us an example of a few of those questions?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be anything from, are we speaking to the right contact? Do we have the right buy-in from decision maker to end user? Do we have the data to be able to prove that value that we know we have to drive home? Do we have alignment on licensing needs? So it can be very strategic and also very tactical to be able to exit to the next stage.
That's great. And you mentioned applying the concept of never lose alone. What are some ways in which other internal stakeholders are involved in your renewal process? And maybe what are some of the indicators or triggers that would tell you it's time to bring someone else in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that is a large part of our current at-risk process, where we are looking at the anticipated churn reason or kind of what theme we feel is really contributing to this pain that the customer is feeling that puts the renewal at risk. And while there's definitely no finger pointing, there are certain cases where, it might be a missing product feature, or it might be cost. And so being able to bring in leaders from whatever kind of bucket they own. We've previously done biweekly at-risk reviews where we have leaders from each of our different departments coming to that call, taking ownership of partnering with the CSM to bring that customer back to health, regardless of whether or not they're in the renewal window or not. And so that really ensures that there's full visibility of some of these risk reasons. We also have, our VP of product has absolutely no problem jumping on a call that's part of the renewal conversation to present a roadmap feature that the customer specifically indicated is critical to their success in the next year.
Awesome. Vanessa, let's shift over to you. Talk to us a little bit about what your renewal process looks like, how it's been influenced by sales, and what are some key kind of tactical aspects of it?
Yeah, sure. So for a little background at SAC, I think we're very similar to Catalyst in that since I joined, 5 years back, we've always had a CSM team and a renewals team. So we do have a team that specializes. For people on the call, I know not everyone has that situation. The previous two companies where I was a CSM and I managed teams, we did own the renewals ourselves as a CSM. So I've definitely seen both models, and I'll try to, throughout the time here, talk about both models. So at least for us at SAC right now, very top of mind with all of the risk happening, again, layoffs and, people really evaluating where can I cut budget on my tech stack spend. I think the similarities that I see between our renewals team that we work very closely with and sales is it's exactly what Melanie was saying, more strategic about who's your buyer, what's their buying process, what is the timeline, who's going to sign off, the people that are signing off, how are they thinking about value and evaluating this? Because I think one of the biggest things that we've really seen, especially in the last year, is your main point of contact, in which for us at Slack, that is within IT. So, a VP of IT, a CIO is probably our best case who we want to be at as an exec sponsor. They're probably thinking about this a little bit differently than potentially a CFO or someone else in procurement or in finance that needs to sign off on it. So I do think renewals and the CSM are really needing to work together to understand who those stakeholders are and what they care about. To Melanie's point, I think that is the biggest difference between renewals and a pre-sale cycle, where for us, we're really trying to tie back to what sales discovered. What are your pain points? What were you really trying to solve when you invested in the solution? But now the CSM really needs to provide the renewals manager with a perspective on how have we filled those? So what have we done? And then where can we still, and I think this is key, where can we still inspire them to do more? So we have delivered value. And look, if you renew with us and we try to lock in a lot of multi-years, here's what we can continue to deliver in terms of value for your end users of the solution. So I think that's a big difference there. We really got to show up strongly there. Another thing I will say about how we think about looking at risk when we do have two teams, a renewal team and a CSM team, is we both are forecasting risk, but separately. So the renewals team will forecast potential risk on the opportunity object. And of course, we use Salesforce. Slack is owned by Salesforce. And the CSMs are managing risk in a red account object. And so similar to Melanie, we all meet bi-weekly to understand, do we have different ideas of what the risk is here? Do we need to have some alignment here? Who do we need to bring in? Again, I agree, it's a team sport, but that's kind of one of the ways that we're making sure the two teams are very aligned and we have the same, go forward steps together.
That's great. We'll circle back to the risk because I'm really interested to learn more about how you guys are identifying and indicating potentially at-risk customers. But before we move on away from kind of what your processes look like, I want to go back to something Mel mentioned of, hey, we don't really have a defined start of the renewal. It actually starts at the very beginning of the relationship. Can you guys, Mel, maybe I'll kick it back to you, but share a little bit about what aspects of your sales or implementation process at the very beginning of the customer journey exist as a means of either vetting prospect fit or laying the groundwork for successful customer outcomes that lead to a renewal.
Yeah, absolutely. We have really two different teams that are involved as part of the sales deal to ensure that the fit is correct. So the first would be our solutions engineers, and they are on most deals. They are responsible from a tech validation standpoint, ensuring that the customer is a good fit. They meet with all of the prospects and are answering questions that are related to kind of the technical side. Can we do this? How would you do that, etc. We also involve our implementation team, generally on some of the larger deals that are a bit more complex. But the implementation managers will specifically speak to onboarding and kind of setting expectations, how our customer can best prepare for that, what the process looks like, what timelines we aim for, and if that fits into the customer schedule, and if we need to remeasure or recalibrate there, what resourcing we would need in order to get an instance of Catalyst off of the ground as well. And really just at the end of the day, ensuring that we're a good fit overall. So it's really important that we have multiple stakeholders internally that are meeting with prospects to ensure that we're not only able to meet their needs from a technical standpoint, but that we're going to be good partners at the end of the day. And I think that that's like the step one foundation of how successful the renewal is in a year's time.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you there. Here at Orem, we've found a similar balance through our pilot process, which is conducted by our solution team, which falls under the CS umbrella. And a key component of our pilot process is effectively vetting these prospective customers. Our solutions team, we've enabled them with the authority to veto a deal where the prospect isn't a good fit or set up for success. And that's really important, right? Is we want to make sure that anyone we're bringing in to the kind of Orem customer base is set up to be successful. And so if they're not, our solutions team is really helping identify that. Vanessa, let's come to you. And I'm curious a little bit about maybe what that partnership and handoff looks like to help set up your customers for success in a renewal down the road.
Yeah. So at Slack, I think things operate a little differently. A lot of customers tend to be a fit for Slack. I think we have a little bit less like technical criteria. And so that is nice about Slack, is that a lot of people out there, different businesses can be Slack customers. And I do think with us that initial vetting is maybe a little less important because we have a freemium land and expand model. So any engineering or product teams or whoever can really start using Slack, see if they like it. And then that's where CS really comes in partners with sales to actually expand that adoption. So it's just our motion is a little bit different. But completely agree. I think the most successful renewals, and when you think about what does a good high quality renewal program look like, you have to really start at that beginning and make sure you're really understanding and defining with your customer what success looks like. That is a huge part for us in the handoff between, a net new big logo and big relationship of what we capture in the handoff document and meeting between an account executive and a CSM. It's of course a lot of other questions about, who are the people involved and what's their tech stack, but really we're trying to get to the heart of what are they really trying to solve, right? Is it a collaboration productivity play? Is it an employee engagement play? Is it we want to integrate all of our apps to deploy code quicker and do these things? We really need to understand that to make sure the rest of the relationship, the implementation, whether they use professional services or whether the CSM themselves is implementing and onboarding the customer. But then, of course, in that ongoing adoption and in those executive business reviews, which are super critical to keeping the customer on track throughout the life cycle before the renewal, we really want to continually tie back to how they were envisioning success. And that can change, right? We need smart, intelligent CSMs who can say, oh, COVID popped up, or oops, they popped up with layoffs. Maybe success is now going to be defined differently. But we really need to make sure that we have a handle on that. And I think when you do that and you're constantly tying and showing value as it relates to them, I think that's when the renewals should be a no-brainer. Even if, and again, we have these at Slack, we might have to right size the deal because maybe there's not enough employees there anymore. So that can still happen. But I do think that's the difference between like an uncontrollable type of churn versus ones that you can really go in and control.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Thank you for sharing with that. Let's pivot a little bit to at-risk indicators. This definitely seems to be a topic some of our audience is hoping to hear about, as well as something you both have touched on a little bit in some of your answers. So we know in our perfect world, each of our customers would be highly engaged, receiving so much clear value from our products and service that the thought of not continuing for another term would never cross their mind. Unfortunately, that's not always the way it goes. And we know that waiting until the end of a customer's term to confirm value or address concerns is not a winning strategy. So let's go into somewhat of a two-part question, but I think both parts are important. Vanessa, let's start with you, but would you share with us what some of the indicators your team uses and leverages to identify and address potentially at-risk customers? And then once identified, what happens next? What are some of the tactical steps your team takes in order to address those concerns and at-risk customers?
Yeah, and I love the question. I love that. It's like high level, and then what are the actual tactical steps that we hope the audience here can take away? So thanks for the question. So at a high level, when we think about looking at risk, we use a lot of things here at Slack, and we've tried to get more sophisticated over time. So starting at the basic things, I think for us, it's adoption. So we can have a company, they buy 3,000 seats of Slack. We want to make sure that we have a weekly or monthly active user counts as close as possible to what the customer bought. So, I mean, to be quite honest, it's simple, but it's really, we have seen pretty correlated to what the renewal outcomes are going to be. So, we start there. Where do we see big gaps between what they purchase and what the usage is? From there, we look at things like maturity score. So you can have a lot of people using Slack to DM each other. Like, how can we truly tie Slack there to delivering true work and business value? So we have this beautiful maturity score that many smart people at Slack put together, where we look at, are we tied into other systems through integrations? Are they, file sharing and using all of our features? So that maturity score also helps us think about how much value we are delivering, or what more work we need to do. We have an overall health score, which blends a lot of these things together: the adoption, the maturity score, yes, no questions, like, do we have an exec sponsor? And we do look at, especially at the management level, what are the overall trending health scores? I will say, when it comes to my team, they're more specifically looking at, again, the adoption and maturity metrics. One of the things that we built out a little over half a year ago, probably coming up to a year actually, we built out a risk signals dashboard. So we looked at 3 years of past renewal data events, and we said, how are those tied to changes in adoption, changes in maturity score, changes into all these underlying things, so that now we're trying to predict, when we see these changes 120 days, 90 days ahead of renewal, this is a good signal to you, ex-CSM, that 4 of your customers are having this risk signals. Go in there and do some discovery. Do you need to open up a red account so we can start tracking this risk? So that's at a high level. When it comes to this risk signals dashboard, or I'm on a call with the customer and they're telling me directly, hey, I'm being asked to squeeze my budget down by 20%, Slack's on the chopping block. Like, what do you do next? So for the team, again, we open up a risk object in Salesforce. And then from there, we start thinking, I love what Melanie was saying, right? This is a team sport. We love to have what we call a risk rally. So bringing together the account executive, bringing together the renewal manager. And then depending on the spend level, a lot of times I'll be there. So I can't necessarily be there for every single risk internal call, but for ones where, it meets a certain ARR threshold, we do want management leadership on the renewal, sales, and CSM side to be involved. And then we have different playbooks. So the next steps that we would take after that internal call for, hey, our CIO is saying that they don't see the value of Slack. It's a chat tool. They can go to Teams or Google Chat. That's going to be a different play than if they have layoffs, or there's a huge product gap that is really not allowing their administrative team to, secure Slack. I don't know, I'm just throwing something out there. So from there, we have playbooks that the CSMs can really lead on. And we do see the CSMs really driving a lot of this and really being in charge of getting the AE and renewals manager kind of all rowing in the same direction. And then we would do different steps, like meeting with the right internal stakeholders there, thinking about how are we quantifying value. And I think with value for this, audience, I think you can look at that in 2 ways. One way is, if you haven't done deep due diligence with them yet, can we make some assumptions of value? Can we challenge them to get them to think about what value could look like? But then can we actually present to them true use cases where we see people at that company really using Slack in ways that are driving true business value for the organization? And so we like to package that all together in a lot of the different meetings we're having as we're fighting the risk together for a few months.
I love how quick you are to pull in other internal stakeholders and really make it a team effort when it comes to renewals and risk. And you talked a lot about specific playbooks based on, different types of at-risk indicators that are being flagged. Melanie, let's shift over to you, because I know playbooks are one of the bread and butter things of Catalyst. And I'm sure you guys also have your own set of indicators as well as plays that your CSMs execute upon.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was great to hear you speak to it as well, Vanessa, because there's so much similarity. I think that the way that we are looking at determining risk Definitely part of that is health scoring. So what we're doing with health scoring is there are certain definitions based on the segment, but at the end of the day, they're really anchored in kind of three core areas. First is engagement. So again, similar to what you had said, Vanessa, do we have an executive sponsor and do we meet with them regularly? We're also looking at adoption or utilization. So again, very similarly comparing licensing, contracted licensing to current usage, and then also product maturity. So are they using, one of our kind of foundational elements is note documentation or task completion in Catalyst, but are our customers starting to use some of the more mature items such as playbook sequencing, where you can literally set up a series of emails that says, if this happens, send this email. And so that is what identifies our health score for all of our customers. We've also done a churn analysis as actually well as a growth analysis, because on the other half of this, it's super important to not only indicate those customers who are at risk, but which customers are super healthy and are potentially ready for growth. So we're able to use that churn and growth analysis to inform that. We just did another refresh of our health score. We're pretty adamant on setting the health score and letting it, run its course for a period of time before we make any changes, just to ensure that we're not changing things too early to be able to actually measure results. But we feel really great about what our health score is putting out and identifying for risk. We also have a CSM sentiment field, which candidly, when I joined, I thought, sentiment, I'm a CSM. I'm not really sure that I know that I'm gauging this the same way that my peer CSM is gauging. But our SVP of CS at SID is brilliant. And CSM sentiment is as simple as sharing some of your core interactions with your exec asking, where you would end with your sponsor. If the answer is yes, they get green sentiment. If the answer is no, that's red sentiment, and it is immediately identified as an at-risk account. And so sometimes it's really just as simple as asking the sometimes difficult and awkward to ask questions. We also are looking at time of renewal. We're doing an assessment just based off of their current state, changes that might be outside of our control and really have no impact on the relationship with Catalyst, but might ultimately impact fit. Maybe they've changed subscription models or have entered a new industry, et cetera. So just taking a review of that prior to the renewal itself and determining a risk score based off of that. Once we've identified a customer that's at risk, again, very similar to Vanessa, we have two different ways of handling that risk. So we have a very macro approach, which regardless of where you're at within the customer journey, how close you are to renewal, we are looking at the overall relationships and risks themes such as, loss of executive sponsor or missing a product feature or low adoption. We have those risk themes identified in a field, and anytime a theme is selected, there is a resulting save play that triggers through a playbook. So as soon as that playbook triggers, the CSM receives a series of step-by-step recommendations, as well as some email content that we know has previously worked well for this particular risk theme. And so there is a very methodical approach on how to mitigate. We, of course, also have full trust in confidence in our CSMs, and these are guidelines and what has worked previously. But if there are items that they want to complete in addition to that, they are more than welcome to add additional steps to that save mitigation. We then also do reviews of those on a quarterly basis just to ensure that, hey, these are the steps 1 through 5. 3 CSMs out of this step 6, and it was successful each and every time. So let's make the adjustments. Once a customer who is at risk outside of their renewal window, and when I say renewal window in this context, we'll say 120 days prior to their renewal date, we go in and tag those save plays as renewal risk, just to ensure that we have full line of sight into the impact of that risk on the renewal. So again, those are kind of the macro overall relationship risk themes. We then have specific renewal risk, which has its own separate playbook, and it's really specific to opportunity level risks. So items such as loss of budget, which I will say we could argue also is a macro theme. So we don't only identify that as a risk theme during the renewal. Term is near expiration. So we are, in the final stages or very close to the renewal date. We don't have a signed contract. Change in decision maker. So maybe all of our core team is the same, but the person who signed the order form last year is no longer there. And so we need to be able to prove value quickly to somebody new. Same idea here is the macro playbooks. This risk theme determines the save plan, which launches. And again, these plays include tasks to complete, emails that are generated. I can create emails that will be sent off on behalf of our finance team or my director. And the one thing that I will say is important to note that as we're talking about macro versus renewal risk is even though we might be 300 days prior to the renewal date, one key component to our forecasting process is CSMs have a field that's likelihood to renew, and it's tagged to the opportunity. So regardless, every time they're interacting with the customer, regardless of how close it is to the renewal, they're feeding me information and intel on where we think they're at with the renewal so we can then adjust the forecast accordingly.
Gosh, what great information. I hope the audience has really taken lots of good notes from what you guys have shared.
Just can I jump real quick?
Yes.
Like one thing, I love this idea of the CSM sentiment, like separately, and then thinking about likely to renew and really you getting the voice of them from there. I think we love data and like I'm nerding out on all the data and all of the signals, but sometimes you have to take a step back and say the people who are meeting with these customers, again, hopefully it's a very regular cadence, you're having EBRs with them, like you really are the best sensor of what you think this customer is going to do. And so I love that you guys are really leaning into that and operationalizing it. So just shout out to that. And there's one quick perspective I wanted to share because I do know we have a lot of CSMs on here who probably do the renewals themselves and don't have separate teams like Melanie and I. Just calling out, like, there's so many pros and cons of each operational model. I think when you're hearing about all of the work that Melanie's team and the CSM team, like all the work that we need to do to coordinate, be on the same page, making sure we understand the sentiment from working with them with implementation to renewal, like that takes coordination. And when you are just doing the renewals yourself as a CSM, you have a little bit less of that. But of course, you can hear from all of the forecasting intelligence and sales methodology. There's obviously a lot of pros of having two different teams. So just wanted to call that out for the audience who I know might not have two separate teams.
What a good call out. I know we're kind of getting a little bit close to end of our time here. So I do want to go to one question that's particularly coming up a lot this year, and you both hit on. And that is the fact that this year, based on macroeconomic and just macro events, many times our typical economic buyer, so far, Vanessa, you mentioned it's often folks on the IT side. Melanie, it's probably, I would be your economic buyer as VP of customer success. And key decision maker. But what we've noticed a lot in this year is that your primary economic buyer isn't always the only person who can block a deal. And during this time, folks like CFOs, the RevOps or procurement leaders hold greater influence on how departmental budgets are spent and even have the authority to block some of these deals and renewals from happening. So can you guys talk a little bit about how your teams are navigating building relationships or succeeding with your non-daily stakeholder and non-primary economic buyer who does have influence over the deal? Let's start with Vanessa. Sorry.
Okay. It's funny on this question. I'm like dying to hear Melanie's thoughts because I know she's like living and breathing this all day long. So I'll try to go quickly so we can give more time to her. I think for us, really, again, we are seeing this. And I do think one of the things that we are educating our CSMs, AEs, and renewal managers to just really ask is really even pushing the people within IT, again, our main buyer, like, are the people going to be involved in this? What are they going to want to see? And sometimes they might not even know that themselves. And so I think we need to be really ready to arm them in a different way. I mean, one of the things that I hear all the time from my team that's managing a lot of these tricky renewals and risky renewals is I VP of IT, like they love Slack. They're telling us they love Slack, but they need to put together the like pros and cons of potentially moving off of Slack and going to a cheaper solution. And they need to be armed with how are we really driving, revenue or time savings, because they're going to need to present that to their CFO or someone in procurement. So I do think this is really the time in this market to really partner with your economic buyer and ask them, because to be honest, they might not fully even know themselves. And I think that's where, again, going back to what I said earlier about quantifying value, if you think about crawl, walk, run, crawl is, okay, maybe we haven't dug really deeply and thought about quantifying your exact value. Here are other customers like you where we have done this. Let's extrapolate based on, how many users you have and what your adoption looks like, what that could look like. Like, let's just start there. And then let's try to get some, individual use cases and value stories from your end user base. And then of course, the best is like, let's go really deep and think about surveys and doing all of this work to get you a really nice, round number for your specific instance. But again, you can't necessarily do all those steps with every customer. So I do think, great CSMs and great renewals managers just see how far they can get on that like value quantifying journey. But really important part to helping your economic buyer defend the spend along with you to the people that, might come in last minute.
I love that. Really arming your champions there to go to battle internally for you. Mel, let's hand over to you to wrap us up on this question.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm going to take it one step back just super quickly, just because this is absolutely something that we have seen time and time and time again. And so there are a few touch points that I have introduced as a result, just to try and get ahead of like, hey, the decision maker contract signer has changed and now we're like 30 days away from renewal date and I need to figure this out quickly. So what I have started to do is after we have a net new customer join the Catalyst fam, 60 days into their partnership with us, I am sending an introductory email that contains a video of myself, lets them know what they can, what they can expect from me, how I'm going to work with them. It's also validating procurement information. So who am I going to work with on the renewal? Are you using a third-party source that I need to be aware of? And any other information gathering. A lot of that information does come in from the sales cycle, but I need to validate it even 60 days after that deal has initially been signed. Part of that information gathering is also asking the customer for when they start their budgeting cycle. And so that allows me an entry point to another touch point with that customer and hopefully procurement contact or decision maker, where I'm reaching out generally beginning of October is when most folks start to budget, and saying, hey, let's connect. I can give you a quote on what renewal costs should look like in the next 6 months for your upcoming spring renewal. Can you give me 15 minutes? We will connect and have the discussion. So I'm a big fan of win-wins. So this ensures that I'm giving the customer the information that they need to secure the right budget, because we also know most folks don't like going back to the CFO and asking for more money. They want to just have it already secured in their budget. But it's also giving me an opportunity to kind of validate if there have been any other changes that I need to be aware of that will impact the renewal process. And then at the renewal window, 120 days out, reaching out to that contact again and starting that initial kickoff conversation. But we are definitely seeing this happen more and more, where someone who doesn't even use the tool, at Catalyst, there are tons of C-level executives who are logging in and being able to see their dashboards or financial reporting or whatever the case might be, all of their growth forecasting in Catalyst. But sometimes we have folks who don't, and they're going to be the ones who sign the order form. They're making the final decision. And so this is where it's really important to lean on champions and understand what the decision maker cares about. So recently we had a customer where our main point of contact was a VP level, 100% bought in on renewing. We had gone through the motions of determining licensing, providing a proposal, putting it into agreement. And when he went to their CEO with the order form, the CEO pushed back on budget. And so I was able to take that opportunity to really gather intel from the VP and understand the top priorities for the CEO at the time. I'll give you one guess at what those priorities were, but they centered around revenue. And with Catalyst being a growth platform and really being able to help not only retain, but grow your customer base, I was able to very quickly gather intel on some of the expansion revenue that they captured as a result of Catalyst or their retention rate improvement after they started using Catalyst. Had sent it over to our main point of contact. They had used it as part of the business case, and within 48 hours, we had signature on the agreement. So I think it really just at the end of the day, like understand what the potential deal killer or somebody who's not 100% bought in on the renewal. What do they care about? And then be able to speak to why it matters that they keep partnering with you.
All right. That's amazing. Thank you, Mel. And I see we have Elliot back in with us.
Yeah, thank you guys. So yeah, just gonna wrap things up now. First of all, want to thank everyone for attending today's event. Big thank you to our sponsor of the event, Catalyst. Shout out to you guys, our speakers, for providing this great content. Recordings and key takeaways are going to be available on our page shortly. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events. I'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.